Hi, my name is Barry. Welcome to my next video. This is the first episode in the series Deeply Embedded Belief Systems. So, as I stated yesterday, belief systems can be either related to culture, religion, family. I'm sure there are many others. But today we're going to tackle culture. And every culture comes with its own set of beliefs. Some are more expansive and some are more constricting. And depending upon the cultures you come from, of course, every set of beliefs has its positives and negatives, in the sense of helping people to grow in certain ways and constricting them, holding them back in others. Some cultures are very, very anal retentive. And by that I mean, okay, just very briefly, in psychology, there's two basic personality types, is anal retentive and oral expressive. Anal retentive are people who basically say, okay, I will tell you when I think you should know. They don't volunteer. They tend to be more rule-abiding for themselves and trying to impose it on others. A good example of that would be the Puritans, very anal retentive. This is how you should do it. This is how thou shalt not do it. And then punishment for people who don't follow the rules. Oral expressive is a different type. It's people who are much more open and jocular. It doesn't matter whether you're shy or an extrovert, introvert. It's just a personality type. And they tend to express themselves very fluently and freely. If they think there's something that might be helpful to you, whether you ask for it or not, they'll tell you. It can be a bit much at times, but they're definitely not withholding. The people who are gossips are generally more oral expressive. People who are the prototypical boss who just really is very controlling and micromanages, more likely anal retentive. And that occurs by cultures and also regions of certain cultures. For example, the Midwest in general tends to be an anal retentive culture. The Northeast tends to be an oral expressive. Now that has nothing to do with the geography, but rather the cultures that settled in those areas. The people who settled in New York are heavily Italian, Jewish, a lot of Southern Europeans, and Southern Europeans are generally oral expressive. Midwesterners tended to be more Germanic or Scandinavian, and they tend to be more anal retentive. If you look at a Scandinavian culture versus, let's say, a Spanish culture, very different. So the people set the tone, has nothing to do with the geography. And some cultures really hinder people because they talk about how emotions are not good. You should not express your feelings. The British are a typical example with their tight upper lip. Men don't cry. You don't share your feelings. You hold it in. That's why their humor, for us at least, tends to be very dry, even though the British find their humor absolutely hilarious. But we're not talking about humor. But that's just an example. Other examples of cultures that are more withholding would be Japanese, Irish culture. I've already mentioned Scandinavian. some forms of Northern German culture. Expressive cultures are generally Mediterranean cultures, all around the Mediterranean. I don't know, maybe it has something to do with the temperature. When you're cold all the time versus when you're always hot. Who knows? And I'm sure there are many other cultures all over the world that I'm less familiar with. But if you grow up in an anal retentive environment, that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be that way. It just means that you'll be out of sync with your peers. And it makes it harder to step into sort of a limitlessness, because the hallmark of anal retentive culture is limiting. So if you really want to expand and express yourself, that's why a lot of people move, quite frankly, because they find that they don't really belong where they grew up. Their culture is different, their values are different, and they move to a much more open and expressive area. And then they tend to be able to explore life better, and they find themselves at home. On the other hand, people who grow up in a very oral expressive area doesn't mean that they're going to want to do that. Sometimes these people are more inhibited, more shy. They want to be more withdrawn. They're not inclined to really sharing a lot. They can be more private. And for them, going to an anal retentive culture is much more harmonious. They're not having this burden constantly put on them to share, to emote, to express what they're feeling, what's going on inside of them. Some people really just don't like to do that, and that's perfectly okay. They have their own path to follow, and it's generally a more inward path rather than an external path. The problem with oral expressive is you can be so caught up in the environment that you forget that you also have an inner life. And the problem with anal retentive is you're so caught up in your own inner world that sometimes you forget the outer world. Every aspect has their own. The way I tend to deal with these types of dichotomies are, depending upon which one they come from, if they're comfortable, well, that's not an issue. But if they're not comfortable, and being a very oral expressive person myself, and coming from that type of culture, I tend to not get a lot of oral expressive people who have problems with that orientation. But I do get a lot of anal retentives who want to expand, want to grow, and come up against lots of shoulds. Because the hallmark of anal retentiveness is shoulds. You should do this, you should not do that. And shoulds can be very, very limiting. Shoulds can come from any source: parents, culture, environment, religion, whatever. But shoulds tell you, okay, here are the boundaries. They're generally rigid. And within these boundaries, it's okay. Outside of these boundaries, it's not. When I talk about religion, I'll be talking about the same type of issues, but from a different orientation. Culture is neither good nor bad. As I said, in every retentive culture, there are wonderful aspects. Look at what Japan has produced. Even though it's one of the most rigid and constricting culture, it produces incredible innovations in tech, in art, in culture, dance, music. It's still a very creative culture. But if you look at what they create, it's usually within certain boundaries, within certain confines. But within that, they flourish. Nobody ever says that Japan is a very backward society. So they found a way to flourish within their boundaries. To my awareness, in Irish culture, they tend to put aside their constrictions and open themselves up more. So it's something to go against, free yourself from. But of course, a lot of people do very well. There are some very, very famous Irish writers and playwrights and all kinds of other things that Ireland produces for the world. So, and look at some of these oral expressive cultures. Yeah, Spain, Italy, always known for being heavily expressive. And yet, they have their own areas of dysfunctionality, as well as being very personable. So everything is a balance. Everything is in a harmony. When I find someone who is basically dystonic with between their beliefs and way of living and their environment, that's where it's a problem, and that's where I help them. So take them down into the various chakras, having them look and see what are the beliefs, what are the shoulds, what is stopping you, what is the pressure to go beyond where you've been. And then they find out, oh yes, my parents always taught me, or yeah, this is what we did in my neighborhood, and kids who didn't were not socially acceptable, all kinds of things. And then work through, and they have choices, they have options. Decide what you want to keep and what you want to modify and what you wish to discard. Shoulds are always advisable to transmute into options, into choices. So instead of I have to do this or I should do this, it becomes I choose to do this, or it's an option that I'm going to take up. I'm going to work on and act on it. So this is a brief talk about how deeply embedded beliefs from cultures really go into people's psyche. And some people are okay with the cultures and beliefs that they grew up with, and some people are not. And then if you're not, regardless of what culture and belief you grew up in, I help you open up to whatever you do wish to truly be in order to flourish in your life. So I hope this episode has been helpful, interesting, enlightening to you. And just want to tell you a little about myself. My name is Barry Naroff. I'm a New York State licensed psychotherapist. Do individuals, couples. I do readings. For that, I like a tabula rasa, blank slate. I take out-of-network insurance, not in-network. And assuming your deductible has been met. Also, professional spiritual intuitive. And I hope this is something you like. If you do, you want to write me, either comments, questions, or to schedule an appointment, you can write me at barry@birthrighttherapy.com, or you can go to my webpage, which is Birthright Therapy, or just write in the comments section underneath this video and express whatever questions, comments. If there's something you'd like to see me talk on, I'll do my best to oblige. So if you like what you hear, please do subscribe It helps me in the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to be notified when a new posting comes up, click the little bell next to it and you'll be notified. So thank you. And until the next chapter, next week, goodbye.